Okay, we are going to get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our July succession planning webinar. My name is Helen Schroeder. I'm going to be your co-facilitator for the webinar today. I'll be mostly off camera taking notes and addressing any questions that pop up. And presenting will be my colleague, Dr. Ariana Thompson. For those of you who are new to Sigma, we are a professional services firm that offers talent assessment, succession planning, consulting, and other services for organizations looking to build their internal talent pools. We've been in business for over 50 years, so as a company, we have a lot of experience, and we're looking forward to sharing some of that with you today. A little bit of housekeeping. We have about 60 minutes together. For the first 45 minutes or so, Ariana will walk you through the webinar content to explain what succession planning is, why it's important, and take you through our 6-step process. We will be recording this session, so no need to take notes. We'll share both a recording and a copy of the slides with you following the webinar. As we go, feel free to post any questions that you have in the Q&A. We'll save 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to walk through those together. And of course, you're always welcome to reach out via email. But for now, use the Q&A. Don't be shy. That's what it's there for. And we hope that you will find this session both practical and engaging and informational as you take your own succession planning journeys. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our presenter today. Dr. Ariana Thompson is a senior leadership consultant. She believes in positively transforming the modern-day workplace through thought-provoking, evidence-based insights. Ariana is a subject matter expert in executive leadership, succession management, wellness cultures, and employee growth. In her work here at Sigma, she supports our executive team with succession planning and leadership development and assessment. So thank you, Ariana, for being with us today, and I'll pass it off to you now to get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, How to Build a Comprehensive Succession Plan. And just so you know, we will be holding these webinars every other month this year in 2024. So if you found this webinar useful or interesting, feel free to send any of your colleagues over to our sigmaassessmentsystems.com website and look at the other webinars that we're offering, as well as see when the next one is coming up. So our agenda for today will begin by talking about the basics around succession planning. What is succession planning and how does it compare to replacement hiring? And why is succession planning important? Then we'll talk through an evidence-based process, which is Sigma's 6-step process of going through a rigorous succession planning process. And then we'll wrap up the session by discussing common pitfalls in succession planning, talking about how implementation can be the greatest hurdle, and why you might benefit from working with consultants. So what is succession planning? Succession planning is the process of identifying and developing internal talent to fill critical roles for when vacancies occur. So this is a bit of a wordy definition, but just going to hone in on some of these components real quick. So identifying and developing talent and making sure that talent is ready for when a critical role opens up. So in other words, making sure that the talent is available and ready in your organization to take on the next leadership role if it happens to open up. So for this reason, robust succession plans share a few core features, including being goal-oriented, knowing why you're engaging in succession planning and what you want to accomplish through your succession plan. It should be ongoing over time, so it's not a one-and-done process. You go through a rigorous process of looking at your internal talent, and then you need to see where their areas of development are, and then begin development, and then actually help them transition when a vacancy occurs. And for this reason, your succession plan needs to be very flexible to changing needs, circumstances, or priorities, as you're going to have to update your succession plan anytime that somebody leaves the organization, regardless if they're on your succession bench or in a position that has succession needs. Therefore, a good succession plan will, over time, build a pool of qualified candidates ready for each critical role within your organization. It should provide opportunities for employee growth and development. All too often, we see that people plan for succession, but then never get around to actually developing employees. And you're missing the mark a little if you never get to that stage, as that's what the whole plan is for. But through this process, you can really increase confidence in your company's ability to fill vacant roles, and that will create less ambiguity in your organization and more confidence in your employees as well. So if you have positions such, especially at senior levels, but it can be any level across the organization that are remaining open for extended amounts of time, then people may begin to question, why is this position open? Are we unable to fill it? Did we not plan for this? So doing succession well will really increase that employee confidence and ensure smoother operations over time. So all this to say, succession plans are important because they provide your company with a roadmap for continuity when changes occur. So we're going to start with our first poll of the session. We love to hear from you and hear what you're doing. So if you want, I would love if you could join our poll, and you can join at menti.com, and you can either do this through your internet browser or on your cell phone. So you're going to go to menti.com and use the code 6236 8261. And we will be using the same poll throughout, different poll questions, but the same login throughout the session. So I'll just give everybody 1 to 2 minutes to just get signed in and answer our first poll of the session. Does your company have a succession plan? I'm just going to repeat that once more. You can go to menti.com and use the code 6236 8261. And feel free to let us know if you have any questions in the Q&A box. All right, we're getting our first response now. The response options are, yes, we have a formal succession planning process that is used across the organization. Most of our teams are engaging in succession planning, but there is no standardized process. The next one is, we have a few replacements in mind for people who may be leaving soon. Next is, we haven't thought about succession at all. And lastly, not sure. Wait to see if we can get a few more answers in. Thanks so much for your participation. All right, thank you for your responses. I'm seeing a few more trickle in, so if you're still going, we would love to hear from you. But what I see so far is about 20% of our audience today does have a formal succession planning process, so that's wonderful to hear. Another 40% has a team that is engaging in succession planning, but less standardization around the process. And then another 40% says that we have a few replacements in mind for people who may be leaving soon. And it just evened out to about a third in each of those categories. So thank you so much. Appreciate hearing from you. So next we want to talk about, what is the difference between succession planning and what typically happens in an organization of replacement hiring. Well, replacement hiring is what most organizations do, where you replace the person as soon as they turn over, there is a vacancy and you need to replace them. Therefore, this makes the timing very reactive, and the selection process is just to choose the next best person available. Typically, you're trying to quickly replicate the incumbent, and the information that you use for this process is drawn only from the incumbent and their supervisor, or all too often, the incumbent has already left and you're only using information from the supervisor. It only creates an opportunity to select one successor, and the objectivity is reduced as it's somewhat based on being at the right place at the right time. And the process is hiring done as needed as people leave. So to contrast that with succession planning is much more proactive in timing. And the selection process is longer term to prepare the best candidate for the role. And in succession planning, you can think critically around what kind of competencies are needed and how the next person could be a little bit different from the current candidate if it's helpful to take the role in a different future strategic decision. The information often leverages multiple sources of information, such as other leaders, other team members, and the incumbent themselves, especially as they're likely still available and able to share things like institutional knowledge and technical knowledge so that is specific to the role itself. This process creates a bench of succession candidates that are prepared over time, and at the time of selection, the selection process can occur more objectively based on development and merits. And the process is way more integrated with the employee lifecycle, including recruitment, development, and diversity initiatives. So you can see that succession planning is a lot more strategic as an approach and gives you a lot more options of who to choose when a vacancy occurs. So we'd love to hear from you again. Do you do succession planning or replacement hiring currently, or a mix? And we do have a QR code. If you missed logging in at our last poll, you can scan that QR code with your phone. So go ahead and let us know, what does your team do, succession planning or replacement hiring? I'll give everybody about 30 more seconds. All right. So I'm seeing that about 50% of our audience today does a mix of succession planning and replacement hiring. And then another fourth does succession planning. That's great to see, perhaps even a little higher than we typically see. And then 25% does replacement hiring. Totally fine. We see that often in organizations. People aren't succession planning, but maybe we can help support you with some templates and ideas during the session today. Thank you so much for your responses. So why does succession planning matter, and why should organizations invest in this? The reason is that, especially in this day and age, turnover is inevitable in all organizations, and succession planning can help you prepare for vacancies well in advance. Succession planning helps organizations to retain organization-specific knowledge, otherwise known as institutional knowledge. And this is one of the biggest reasons we see people being motivated to engage in succession planning, as a lot of different domains and types of organizations have people with strong knowledge that if that person was to turn over, it could even impede organizational success, and there might not be existing SOPs to guide others in moving into their footsteps. So working on this in advance, transferring institutional knowledge is really critical. Next is to motivate employees to engage in succession planning, alongside the next one, to create a culture of growth and development. So what we're seeing right now is employees stay at their organization an average of 2 years, and people are very likely to move on if they don't have strong leadership above them and if they don't feel invested in, especially as it relates to their career growth, promotion track, and personal development. So when you engage in succession planning, you're looking at the competencies needed to take on the next role and preparing individuals for those competencies. So employees feel like you can see a future path for them and are investing in them. This in turn helps to that next point of attracting and retaining staff long term. If people are feeling satisfied and like they're growing in your organization, they're likely to stay and they're likely to say positive things about the organization to others, including on things like Glassdoor, leaving reviews. And lastly, it can improve objective decision making as you're not stuck in a reactive mode where you have to just quickly choose the next person, and maybe you might even make someone an interim lead just out of necessity. But with succession planning, you're really developing people in advance and have lots of options once the time comes to choose the next successor for any given position. So next, we're going to dive into Sigma's 6-step succession planning process. I'm going to highlight each of the 6 steps now, but we're going to take a deeper dive and look at each one in a moment. We also have a number of templates for each step of the process, which are available in free on our sigmaassessmentsystems.com website. And we've listed those in the light yellow green on the right-hand side. So the first step of the process is to identify critical roles. Next is to build success profiles. Then we move on to nominating successors, then assessing the development needs of those successors. Then we begin developing talent, and lastly, we measure progress. So I'm going to walk you through each of those steps now. So again, the first step in the process is to identify critical roles. The goal at this stage is to identify the roles in your organization that should be a targeted part of your succession planning process. So a critical role is any role within the organization where if someone was to leave, it would create challenges to operations. That's a really easy and straightforward way of considering your critical roles. So most often we start succession plans with the most senior level, such as the senior leadership team, the executive leadership team. And the reason is that these organizational positions are critical to success. And if you have a vacant CFO or CEO, this could cause challenges to operations and lead to uncertainty within the organization. However, we do recommend not stopping at that senior level. There are many other roles within the organization that may require succession planning. Many of our clients that we work with move on to the second and third levels of management so that they hit those next levels, which might be VPs and directors, and then senior managers and beyond. In an ideal world, we would be able to do succession planning for every role within the organization. Although I also want to point out that there might be other critical roles within your organization to consider, such as key administrative staff or people with a highly specialized skill set, such as in your organization, it might be critical to make sure that you have a succession plan for a software engineer if they manage the organization's software and have a programming language that might not be known by all other people. And so if you lose that person, it might create challenges in your organization. So we usually recommend that you look widely in your organization to comprehensively understand what are your critical roles and how can you plan for them. At this stage, we do recommend you consider both essential people and essential positions. When we get into succession planning, it sometimes can be messy in the beginning. We see situations where someone has been with the organization for 22 years and they really have about 3 hats of the skills that they're bringing and the job that they're fulfilling. And sometimes we have to actually, for succession planning, split that person's role into 1, 2, or 3 roles and then plan different successors for each one depending on the skill set needed. So in the beginning, you can consider both essential people and essential positions, but down the line, you want to focus mostly on the role itself and the competencies needed to fulfill that role so that you don't get stuck in thinking that you have to replace a person and you can more objectively focus on the skills needed for success. So once you have identified the critical roles for which you're going to begin succession planning, the next step is to build what we call a success profile. The goal here is to describe the competencies that are needed to perform each critical role. So in our succession planning process, we heavily recommend that you create one success profile for each critical role that you're planning for. And when creating success profiles, there's a few behaviors that are very important to consider. You want to consider success in that specific role. So if they are the head of HR, what does it take to have success as an HR lead? But you also want to consider success in the organization more broadly. So we often look at when we're doing senior leadership teams, we'll look at the competencies needed to be a successful leader on that team and lead the organization. And lastly, we also look at success in the role and in leadership, both now and in the future. So we'll get a bit future oriented, taking a more strategic lens to consider the competencies that might be needed to lead that in that role or successfully carry out the role in the future. So to give you a sense of what a success profile is, we have provided this example. This has been adapted and redacted from an actual client that we have worked with quite recently. And the position here is an HR director, and we'll call the current incumbent Jane Smith for this example. The expected vacancy of Jane Smith is 2024, which is this year, which makes her a 5-star high priority. And then we have on this side here some position demographics. You can learn a little bit more about the role and where it's located. And then we have some elements that you would typically see on a job description under position criteria. Things like educational requirements, such as needing a bachelor's in HR, experiential requirements, such as having been in HR for 8+ years and experience leading teams, and then other knowledge, skills, and abilities, such as knowing payroll and leveraging HR softwares. But then you can see the vast majority of our success profile focuses on the competencies needed for success. So in the middle column, we have competencies needed to be a successful leader at their organization. So at this organization, to be a successful leader, you need competencies like decisiveness, objectivity, prioritizing, and communication. We also have those future-oriented competencies for the leadership team, which include social astuteness and technical orientation. But then we have some role-specific competencies as well. So again, this would be the competencies needed to have success as an HR director. And the competencies include things like flexibility, open-mindedness, valuing diversity, attracting staff, and developing and coaching others. Probably not too surprising if you think about an HR role. And then we also have a few future-oriented competencies for the HR role position, which include vision and client customer focus. So I hope this has given you a better sense of what a success profile is and how it might come together at the end. Next in our process is to nominate successors. At this stage, you've already identified critical roles and built out the success profile so you're ready to consider potential candidates for each critical role. At this time, some tips we have are to challenge yourself to include not only direct reports, but to look more cross-functionally at other departments, teams, or roles to find individuals who might be potential successors. I'll acknowledge this is not always possible. For example, we have a highly technical engineering client where each role kind of has to have a very specific technical knowledge to move up into the next role, but that's not always the case. So whenever possible, we recommend you cast a wide net and look at all individuals across your organization. We also encourage you to think of it as a leadership pipeline feeding in your role instead of simply the next successor. At this time, you're just coming up with a pool of potential successors. You are not planning on the exact person who will be taking over the role. You don't know when that role will become vacant, and you don't know how the individual's development will come over time. And often, actually, who people think at the beginning will be the best successor is not the same as after some time in development and seeing these individuals taking on leadership responsibilities. And lastly, you can consider who might be ready for the role soon, but you can also consider it more long-term of those who might be ready in 2 years or even up to 5 years. Especially if someone is not planning to vacate their position anytime soon, it's totally okay to have a longer ramp-up period for developing the individual for their next role. So again, to give you an example of how this might look in reality, here is a succession bench for that HR director position, who we are calling Jane Smith. And I'm going to try and walk you through this form because it can be a little bit complicated, but I'm going to start on the left-hand side. You can see that we have level A, level B, and level C candidates, and that's where we indicate the timing needed in order to have success. So level A candidates will likely be ready in 0 to 3 years. Level B candidates will be ready in 3 to 5 years, and level C candidates will need 5+ years to be ready. So you can see in level A candidates, we have Jerry Cole, Katura Zahn, and Sarah Jensen as a level B. Next, we can see when they were actually placed in this succession bench to be considered. So Sarah was added as a level B candidate in June 2023. However, Katura Zahn was actually added as a level B candidate back in April of 2022, but progressed to a level A candidate in June of 2023. So we put these dates on here so you can track over time and continue to update where people are in terms of their readiness, and then you can actually move them up and track when they were moved up versus originally added to your succession bench. Lastly, we have their current position. So Katura Zahn and Jerry Cole are both currently HR managers, where our level B candidate of Sarah Jensen is currently just an HR lead. So Sarah actually has one more position she needs to undertake before she would be ready to be an HR director. So Sarah needs to be an HR lead now and then get promoted to an HR manager before she'd be ready to become an HR director, which is likely correlated with the time of readiness, which for her is 3 to 5 years. So again, I hope this is helpful for seeing a more real example of how you might actually place all of your candidates in a succession bench. All right, so this time we've identified critical roles, built success profiles, and nominated our successors through those succession benches. So now we're ready to assess development needs of our successors. The goal here is to identify candidates' development needs. So some tips here are skills is really helpful. We just want to emphasize that. It serves to determine their strengths and development priorities. You can validate each candidate's position on the succession bench. And also, initial assessment serves to set a baseline of skill in which you can evaluate coaching or training success over time. So, for example, we have at Sigma Assessment Systems a leadership assessment called what we call the LSPR, which we use to look at the skills in relation to those that were put on the success profile. So we have a competency model of 50 leadership competencies, and we can see how different people rank against those competencies. So let's say we assessed one of those people who are a successor on the bench for the HR director of Katura Zahn, and we saw that her strength is communication, but an area of development is coaching others. Well, we know that coaching others is important for the HR director position, so you'd be able to identify that as a development need while also looking at her strengths. So let us know if you ever have any questions around assessments, as it's a specialty of ours, and we'd love to chat further. All right, on to step 5. Once you've assessed development needs, now you're ready to develop talent. So the goal here is to use training or coaching to take potential candidates and guide their development into capable future successors. And developing talent involves a number of things and can look a lot of different ways, but at a high level, you determine their developmental priorities, especially after assessments and different things like that. You can even use 360 assessments to get feedback from the team and people who work above and below them to see what other development areas might rise up. And then after you determine these development priorities, you can find opportunities to learn and practice new skills through a variety of methods. And also, it's important to help candidates overcome obstacles or challenges to successful development in the process. So here's another form we have. It's rather simple but straightforward, which can be helpful. And you would take all of your succession candidates and put them into the position. Again, we're looking at the position of the HR director, which is expected to be vacant by the end of the year. And you would plan different development activities to help your candidates get to where they need to go. So you see here that for our level A candidates, we would plan more intensive development activities such as job shadowing and coaching. However, because job shadowing is time intensive and coaching can be a little expensive, for Sarah Jensen as a level B candidate, we would recommend self-directed learning, such as an online learning platform. And then for all candidates, they could be eligible for group leadership training to help build a culture that has shared values around what it means to be a leader. And it's a great opportunity to train a lot of people at once. And then you could add any specific notes around that. We also have we have a lot of forms available for even more planned development activities, which you can peruse on our website. All right, we made it to the final stage of our 6-step process, which is to measure progress. The goal here is to track progress, boost engagement, and quantify success. So the best metrics to use are those that reflect success in your organization. And we see a lot of different metrics that organizations use in our consulting practice. So some of the most common ones are things like rates of turnover or percentages of roles filled internally. Other ones are the amount of time it takes to fill a vacant role. So perhaps in your succession planning initiative, you could reduce the time of an open role being 4 months down to 2 months. Or other ones I've seen, people can get creative with this, are whether or not leaders are able to use their PTO. I love this one because work-life balance is a core value of mine. And it's important that we're able to take breaks from our role, but that can only happen if we have people in our organization who are ready to take over some of our responsibilities in our absence if needed. So it's a great catalyst to help make some momentum around preparing those around you. And so I thought that was a really great metric for that. But your metric will be specific to your organization and what makes sense. But we recommend that before you begin diving into your succession planning initiative, that you record these metrics as a baseline so you can see your progress over time. All right, so those are our 6 steps of our succession planning process that we use across a lot of clients and have success with. And now we'll talk about the common pitfalls we see in succession planning. So the most common pitfalls are focusing exclusively on the executive level. As I mentioned earlier, that's a great place to start and perhaps sometimes the best place to start. But you might be missing out on addressing other critical roles if you stop there. So again, we recommend going several leadership levels down, as well as considering other critical technical positions that you might want to have a succession plan for. The next most common pitfall is keeping succession a secret. So people often feel like this is a touchy subject and they don't want to share what they're doing with the organization. However, what we know is organizational transparency is always the best policy. You don't have to tell your organization that you are doing a succession plan and that you have selected successors. You can frame it as a talent development initiative, that you are doing leadership development with these individuals, but help cue them in that you are looking to prepare them for the next role. And even take it further and have one-on-one conversations with them to ensure you know what they want for their future and whether or not they are indeed interested in being a leader and taking on the next position. The next most common pitfall is delegating all tasks to HR. This is a process that takes time and requires constant attention and updating. And it's fine to involve HR in this process, but you also need to have top-down support for the entire process, such as engaging in initial succession planning and identifying the competencies needed for each role, as well as having support for things like developing employees and having a budget for development. The next common pitfall is failing to update the document or process over time. And you can imagine this happening where you put a lot of time and investment into developing the plan, but then find it challenging to actually update it over time. And for this, we recommend you have other people invested in their own plan. So you can give leaders their succession plan and bench and have them update it over time as people on their team leave or join the company and could be a successor on the bench. So keeping that plan updated over time is really critical, and it helps you stay focused on what development will be needed for each candidate. And lastly, the biggest pitfall is likely strategic plan implementation. And what we see is, and what we know from the data, is that 67% of well-formulated strategic plans fail due to poor execution. And then another data point tells us that 1 in 3 leaders rate their company as poor or very poor at implementing strategic plans. So I think a lot of us actually like strategic planning. It's interesting to think and look towards the future. However, it takes a lot of dedication to do the implementation of the planning process. As I mentioned, we see a lot of organizations that plan for succession, but then fail to take steps to actually develop their employees. So we'd love to hear from you on this question. How successful is your team at implementing strategic plans? I'll give everyone another minute or two to answer. Right, I don't see as many answers coming in. Oh, there's one more. So what we're seeing here is actually 67% of our audience, now 57, says that they sometimes follow through on strategic plans. So not in always, but not too bad. Perhaps that's a little higher than we usually see. Another 29% says we create strategic plans, but rarely follow through on them. So that's a little bit more the average of what we tend to see. And then 14% of our audience says that they're not sure. So it's not surprising to see some of that. If anything, it's great to hear that some people are effectively implementing their plans. But companies may take the time to develop a plan, but then fail to develop their talent or adequately prepare for each candidate for a future succession position. And this is when working with a consultant can sometimes help. And we wanted to share a few of the benefits of working with a consultant. Consultants can give you first and foremost time back. We use streamlined methods that help save administrative efforts over time. So we know that coming and starting a succession plan can be daunting. And we offer a succession launch that helps launch you into succession. And we have a lot of experts who, behind the scenes, do a lot of analysis to look at the competencies selected by leaders and then create things like those success profiles or succession benches for you. Another thing that we have is good processes. We have tried and true methods that we have used and refined from organizations facing similar challenges and trying to achieve similar goals. Consultants can provide accountability by acting as strategic partners to help hold you accountable to your goals, but further than that, helping to create accountability within the organization. If you are investing in a process, people are more likely to attend meetings, provide the feedback needed for succession planning, and help keep your plans on track and moving forward. Another thing that we provide is objectivity. Objectivity is actually quite crucial for succession planning, as a lack of objectivity can actually lead to legal challenges. If any of your processes are said to be creating adverse impact or promoting only one group of people, then it could call the objectivity of your process into question. But we have processes that support unbiased decision making, gathering information from multiple sources, and objective assessments that provide another level of validity to your succession planning process. And lastly, we have a lot of expertise. We have many PhDs on our team who are experienced in organizational psychology and have a lot of consulting experiences from learning from clients who have been in your shoes in the past. So we're curious to hear from you. What are some of the greatest challenges your team faces in succession planning? Some of the common challenges we see are a lack of time, buy-in, knowledge, standardization, having a dedicated team, or maintaining long-term commitment. And I'll give everyone another minute to give us your answers. Love to hear from you. What are the greatest challenges your team faces? All right. What I see is, oh, thank you. Got one more now. About 20% of the audience mentions time, knowledge, and standardization. Another 30% mentions having that long-term commitment, which, as we just talked about, is one of the biggest challenges. And another 10% says that a challenge is a dedicated team. So it's great to see that the only one we didn't see as a challenge being buy-in. So that's actually wonderful to hear from this group, because oftentimes buy-in is also a challenge. So it's great that you have that on your side, but still some other challenges that you might be facing in this process, and that's totally normal. But we want you to know that we are here to help. We have a lot of free resources that are available to you if you might not have the budget to get some more hands-on expertise. And this includes more details about that 6-step succession planning process. So if you found it interesting and helpful, we have a lot of guides and information on our website to support you. We give you access to some of the templates that you saw today, some of those succession benches and profiles and development action planning. Those are all things that you can get free access to on our website, as well as a lot of education on succession planning. I encourage you to search our blog if you're ever interested in one topic, and we may have a good resource for you. I did mention that succession planning launch. What that is a 2 half-day program where we meet with your leaders or other people who might be considered critical roles and do hands-on succession planning. This can either be in person or virtual. And between those 2 half days, our team does a lot of analysis, prepares those success profiles, prepares benches, and really helps guide your process. So that is something that we would love to support you on if you're interested in working with us in the future. And we do often provide customized consulting for any other needs that you might have, from helping develop leaders to assessments and beyond. We also want to let you know about a new service that we have to offer, which is a succession diagnostic tool. And this is just a quick 5-minute survey that helps us and you see how you're doing on succession. It goes through some of those steps. It also has one other that we didn't mention too much today around candidate transition. So at the point of actually moving from a successor to a new role. And it gives you automatic results so you can see what how you're doing today on succession planning and how areas you might have that are strengths and other areas where you might want to invest more. We're also offering a free 30-minute consultation with one of our experts where you can get a debrief on your results, and we're also there to provide resources and anything else that you may need. And you can reach out to me at any time at athompson@sigmaleader.com. And now we'll open it up for the Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box.
Thank you, Ariana. Yes, please don't hesitate to keep letting the questions trickle in as we go. We're going to jump in with a few questions now. And I also just wanted to mention that I dropped the link to those resources that Ariana just walked you through in the discussion in the Q&A box. So take a look there. The templates that Ariana has showed you are all compiled for you in the guide, which is the first link. So definitely recommend taking a look at that and downloading it. Like Ariana said, it's free. And you're welcome to just shoot her an email if you have any questions about how you can apply those at your particular organization too. So first question for you, how transparent should we be with our succession plan?
That's a good question. It will depend on your plan itself, what you're doing, and what the goals of your plan are, but we recommend being as transparent as possible. So if you plan on selecting leaders for a high potential leader development program that's been designed to support your succession initiatives, and we recommend getting really factual around the program that's being offered, why it's being offered, and help people understand what kind of initiatives are being provided at your organization. It can be tempting to kind of hold those close to the heart and not share them widely, but people talk within organizations and may end up having a sense of the activity anyways. So it's better to be really clear and transparent, talk about the selection for different successors. Also, just being transparent around some of the other elements around succession, which is just because you're selected as a successor on a bench does not guarantee that you'll get the position. We recommend really focusing on the investment in growth and development, unless that you will absolutely get this other position in the future, as that just cannot be guaranteed. So all that to say, recommend transparency, but would also recommend that it takes an emphasis on development and talent development or leader development, instead of not recommending that you tell people that they will be a future leader or have this position in the future.
That's an excellent point. If you're the one sharing the information, you have a little more control about how it gets shared and how much of it is shared. Um, so next question is, you said not to delegate succession all to one person. Who should be involved in the succession planning process?
Yes, absolutely. First and foremost, it was great to see that the group today said that they did have buy-in for their succession planning initiatives, as that's not always the case. So I think having senior leadership buy-in is really critical, and senior leaders are the ones tasked with creating the vision and strategy for the organization. So tying that in and saying we really value our employees. We want to invest in succession planning. So we have organizational continuity at all times. This also involves employee development, and we're excited to develop you. That's the type of messaging that should really come from the top. And when it comes from the top, it compels other people to get on board, such as middle management and even down to individual contributors. Sometimes it can be hard for the HR department to be the one spearheading that initiative and that message, and it might not carry as much weight and buy-in, unfortunately, than if it comes from senior leaders. And then once there's that collaboration between HR and senior leadership, then you can ask your next level leadership levels, such as VP and directors, or the ones after that, to participate, to get on board. And then it becomes a responsibility of leaders with their direct reports to have one-on-one conversations around their direct reports' career goals and developmental journey. So it kind of takes the whole organization's participation, although efforts can be led and supported by the HR department.
That's great. Thank you. I'll also drop a link to one of our blogs, which walks you through how to create a succession advisory team. That's the term we usually use with clients, your SAT. So you can get a little bit more information regarding that question, the practicalities of setting one of those teams up there. Okay. At what point do you let candidates know that they are the ones who are in line for succession?
You can let them know that you're interested in developing them for a future position. Like, hey, we really see you as a potential for our future director of HR position. We can't guarantee it at this time, but we would love to develop you and help get you the skills so that at the time of a vacancy, you can be considered. And then just one-on-one conversations to see if they're interested, what are your career goals, where do you want to go? But beyond that, unless the position is currently vacant and you're offering them position, you should not say that you are the successor. But at the time that you have gone through the entire process, a position becomes vacant, you are choosing somebody, that's the only time that you want to say, hey, we've selected you as the successor for this role.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, up next is, can you help me understand a little bit better the difference between a job description and that success profile that you showed?
Yes, that's a great question. So the difference is that a success profile is more competency based. So a job description typically has a lot of knowledge, skills, abilities, education requirements necessary for that role. But we do competency modeling, so we capture those leadership and other special behaviors that will be needed to have success. So we pair some of those job description information that are critical with those competencies that have a holistic success profile. That's not to say that you won't still have job descriptions, and job descriptions are important for understanding what's expected in a role and the specific minutia of the tasks. But a success profile supports development, as you can look a little bit more high level at the leadership qualities needed in order to be a successful leader in the future.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to post one more link for you all here. This is the link to Sigma's leadership competency framework. There's 50 competencies. They're divided under 4 main categories. So you can take a look at those and see how they fit in with what you do at your organization. And if it fits, then you can apply those to most of our other templates and resources. So that's a very handy baseline for you to work off of. Okay, I'm keeping an eye on the time. We've got time for one more question. So we'll do this one, and then if you have any other questions that didn't get addressed, feel free to reach out to Ariana via email. In my organization, there is a focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion. How would you recommend doing succession planning with a focus on those elements?
Absolutely. I think a lot of the things that we said earlier in this conversation would apply. So, first and foremost, casting a wide net when you're considering successors. Too often, or in the past, we have seen that sometimes people want to replace themselves. Like they want someone that looks like them and thinks like them and has a similar background from them. But that's not always supportive of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as people may have different perspectives, strategies, and skills that are useful to take the organization to the next level. So, really focusing on the competencies and skills needed to do a job rather than having a preconceived idea of what that person should look like. The next thing is using multiple source data, so getting various perspectives on the role itself and as well as multiple perspectives on who could be a successor. And then lastly, we recommend using assessments. Assessments are a great way to assess all your successors in a more objective way. And that allows for more people to be considered and to not pair. We all have some implicit biases just by the nature of living in this society. So it helps to combat some of our implicit biases and think a little bit more broadly and with a more open mind.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that objective measurement is really key. Okay, so with the last minute or two that we have left, I have a few closing announcements. One is that if you are here to get a professional development credit for SHRM or ATD, please send me an email. I'll drop my email in the discussion for you as well. I need that particularly for SHRM so that I can create a certificate of completion for you, and you'll need that as well as the activity code to get your PDC. And then if you liked what you saw here today, Ariana mentioned this at the beginning of our webinar. We are running webinars monthly in this year. This webinar happens every other month. So if you have some other people on your team who you think this would be a great resource for, feel free to share it. We'll be back in September with another succession planning introductory webinar. But do take a look at the calendar. There's lots of other content on there around talent development and some more specific succession planning topics as well. And then last but not least, we would love to hear what you thought, what you liked, what you didn't like about the webinar. I'll send the link to our feedback survey in the discussion for you as well. We do read every single response and we update how we go about our webinar process each time. So let us know what you thought. We'd appreciate it. And like we said earlier, if you have any questions or would like to talk about how some of these concepts apply to your organization and your leadership team in particular, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our consultants are always happy to chat. And with that, I'll say thank you for joining us. Thank you, Ariana, for being with us today, and we hope you all have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful day.
Bye.